Hello, everyone. A very good morning to you all. My name is Harleen, and I'll be your host for today's session. I hope you're having a great day so far and are now excited and ready for the brand new informative session of the Masterclass series organized by the Institute of Product Leadership. Before we start today's insightful session, I'd like to give you a quick introduction to the Institute. The Institute of Product Leadership is Asia's first business school providing accredited degree programs and certificate courses in management, product leadership, data science, design, strategy, and leadership. The Institute has partnered with three universities in India and the University of Houston in the United States. The Institute was founded in 2012 with the singular mission of creating 10,000 product leaders in the country. Ever since, the organization has designed and delivered programs in collaboration with various institutes, universities, and corporates to the senior working professionals to help them make career transitions into product leadership. The Institute has built and developed a community of over 3,700 plus successful alumni, leading the product, data, and design teams across the world. We're also knowledge partners for 250 plus organizations worldwide. You can find out more about the Institute and the programs offered on our website. You can find the link for the same in the chat window. And for those of you who have joined us via LinkedIn, you can find the same in the comment section. Today's session is on how to build AI-driven products. Once our speaker for today presents her insights, we'll open up for questions. You can have your questions ready and post them on Zoom in the Q&A section. This session is also being streamed live on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. So viewers on any of these channels, please feel free to post your questions in the comment section and we will share them with the speaker. All right then, let me kickstart this session by welcoming and introducing today's speaker, Ms. Malavika Lakireddy. Malvika is a seasoned product leader with over 18 years of expertise in crafting innovative data and AI-driven products. With a stellar career spanning global teams and contributions to top organizations like 247.ai, TiVo, and Zeotab, Malavika's portfolio speaks volumes. From the development of diverse products ranging from sentiment and analyzers and chatbots to ad serving platforms, ad quality assurance, customer insights, her work is truly transformative. Beyond her professional achievements, Malvika is dedicated to nurturing the next wave of product leaders as a product mentor with NASCAR. A very warm welcome to you, Malvika. We're thrilled to have you with us today. I hope you're having a good morning and are doing well.
Thank you, Harleen. Thank you so much, Harleen and the Institute of Product Leadership for inviting me to share my experiences with the larger audience. I'm hoping that I can do justice to the 2 hours that folks have carved out. And there's something actionable and informative that folks are going to take back post this session.
Of course, I'm sure. The session, or I can say the screen, is yours.
Super. So can you guys see my screen? Question number 1. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes, your screen's visible.
Super. So thanks, everyone. So I'd like to first and foremost address what I'm sure many of us are facing in organizations. The fact that right now AI has become a buzzword, which essentially means that everybody is asking about it, which means that our customers are asking, our board is asking, our investors are asking, our teams are asking. Everybody wants to do AI or include AI in their portfolio. However, a lot of times, some of these initiatives may not truly lead to an impact or may not be given the right kind of resources to truly make them successful. So Harleen did give a background about my experience, but I wanted to do a slightly more deep dive about the experience because my experience is almost akin to the evolution of AI, what we have seen in the industry. So I built the first set of recommendation engines for chatbots in 24/7 AI using predictive analytics and, of course, sentiment analysis. A lot of this at that point of time was very, very rudimentary and brute force. I then went on to do a lot of work in the ad tech space, which included price optimization, ad relevancy, ad quality. And these included a gamut of AI models. Not all of these are same. And a lot of these are very what is called discriminative AI models. I then had worked in Quanta for again where I co-created some of the models for credit scoring for NBFCs as well as geolocation analytics using AI and machine learning. At Bugle is where I started to use the first set of LLMs. This was the time when Google had open sourced their BERT models, and we leveraged some of those open source models to build customer insights out of reviews. This was again very, very heavily AI ML product, but this was not generative AI. And that's a very important distinction because the next few experiences where I really started to leverage generative AI to build, I would say, products which could not be imagined before. A product that I built was an email marketing tool where the entire email was generated using OpenAI's APIs and was in tune with the brand voice as well as the context of the occasion and of the product. So this is where this was when OpenAI had just opened up their ChatGPT APIs, and I was lucky enough to work with a company to leverage those to build a very differentiated product to market. And then at Zeotap, we used GenAI to build customer segmentation based on user prompts. So this essentially was, again, a very enterprise-specific use case, and it was a very data-specific use case. So I have some learnings about what worked, what didn't work over there as well. So hopefully I will be able to share some best practices from these experiences, and these will aid the next generation or the next set of folks who are embarking on their AI product journey. So what is AI? So AI is actually an overarching field of science. It is not ML, it is not Gen AI. It is an overarching field of science where different techniques are used to emulate human intelligence in machines. So if you look at the world of AI, it has got many different layers. Of course, on the top of it is AI. Within AI, you have a simple, it could be a simple regression model. But of course, you have other machine learning models, and you have deep learning models. And at the smallest or the newest entrant is the generative AI models. And each of these can be used for different use cases. So when we look at the evolution of AI, the first was the artificial narrow intelligence, where the models essentially enabled a specific use case with a specific output. A good example is predicting the optimizing for price now, or optimize or predicting the demand, or providing a recommendation of a product to a user who's browsing a site. So all of these are examples of artificial narrow intelligence. And from artificial narrow intelligence, we are slowly moving to the artificial general intelligence. We are not there yet. And I would say we are in between ANI and AGI, but we already have many companies who are speaking about artificial superintelligence, where the machines will have a far greater conscience and will also be able to perform tasks that even humans can't perform. So I think in our lifetime, I would think that we will get the opportunity to witness the artificial super intelligence being available to the world. I'll briefly touch upon some of these topics, but I'll not go in depth for the simple reason there is a wealth of information out there, and for us to go through these topics in depth will probably take us just more time than we have today. So within, as we saw, that the AI is an overarching space, and within that we have got machine learning, we have also deep learning, we also have generative AI. But overarchingly, I'll just break it down into two types of I would say AI models that we typically encounter. And the first one is discriminative AI. Discriminative AI essentially means that the output that the model can produce is very, very specific, and it is based on a prior data that has been provided to it. So, for example, typical use cases of this are either to classify. A classification could be is whether is an email is a spam email or not, or whether uh, it's simple with, whether based on images, the gender is male or female. So these are very simple classification, use cases, or it could also be used to predict. Predict is essentially giving out a probability of, let's say, someone buying, probability of someone leaving a site, probability of a customer churning, probability of a customer or affinity of a customer to a new product, or what should be upsold, so on and so forth. So that is more on the prediction side. An important part of AI models is that, if you look at conventional programming, and I'm hoping that many of us typically would have come from a programming background. And typical conventional programming is very rule-based. A programmer would write a rule, and given an input data and the program, you would get a result, and that result was always the same. In case of machine learning, the machine learning is slightly different, is because when we are training the model, we are giving the model uh, the result, we are giving it the underlying data, and there we are asking the model to figure out, okay, what should be the rules or what should be the program for this data that would give this result. And the machine would spit out a program or a model which can then be used on further incoming data. So this is slightly different and from a traditional, I would say, programming paradigm. And this is also important to know because all AI models are heavily dependent on the data. And this is also something we'll speak about as we look at when we looking to build AI, AI products. So generative AI is something which was unimaginable. Even when I was working at Bugle, while we used LLMs, we did not generate, or we did not have the generative capability, which essentially means that producing an output which is fundamentally different, or which could be different from the input altogether. And this has opened up a whole new use cases for AI to implement and to improve. So when we talk about generation, it's not only text. The generation, there's a very, very wide range of types of outputs which can be generated using generative AI, which includes everything from images, video, audio. There have been cases where people have produced all new music based on generative AI. There are things like synthetic data, their designs, code. And this has been one of the more popular use cases, especially for enterprise products, and so on and so forth. So recently I saw a video from Alibaba who were using a model, which is called the EMO model, to produce an entire video just from an image where the emotions are also matching the voice. So again, this is a case of applying different models to produce that very, very real-like experience. So this is, again, a simple example to differentiate between discriminative and generative. Discriminative is primarily you give it an input, and based on the similarity of it with the prior training data set that it has seen, it will give an output saying that, okay, hey, does it match or doesn't match? Whereas generative is that you give a prompt, you train it with, let's say, dog photos, and you give a prompt saying that create a dog image. That image may not be the 100% as per what it has seen in the past. And that is the beauty of the generative AI models. So again, this is a slightly high level and slightly technical viewpoint. But the one thing that I would like us to take away is that typically discriminative models give a very specific output set, whereas generative, the output is not bound, and it is not it will not match or depend on the prior input set. And as we can see again, the evolution of traditional software engineering to discriminative AI to generative AI, as we just saw, is that conventional software is you you create some rules, heuristic rules, and you code them, and based on that, those rules, based on the input, you would get certain output. Discriminative is you would give input, you would give a sample output, and the machine would learn the rules, and these machine rules would actually drive the output in future. And generative AI, generative AI are typically trained on a variety of data set, especially the general purpose generative AI models that are out there. And these typically would give, you would give input and data, you would get answers. But in this case, when the essential training happens, this training is more of a fine tuning on top of the existing models that are out there. And you can see some of those pros and cons further in the presentation. So I'd like to pause here. I think I went through a lot of content very, very fast. And I can maybe take a question. Yes, so data security is something we'll come to a bit later, especially when you're looking at build versus buy considerations. So if there's anything specific in the content so far, feel free to flag those questions. But I'm also happy to provide some resources. And I'm sure everybody is getting inundated with courses on AI and generative AI, which sometimes can provide a good foundation. Okay, moving on to building AI products. And I think this is a more fun part. This is something that as product professionals, this is something which is much more relevant to us. So when I look at the AI landscape, I would like to break it down into two. One is the AI products. These AI products are essentially models as a service or provide any one of those AI infrastructure pieces. Whereas AI-driven products are what use these services to drive those experiences and use cases to end customers. And both of these require a slightly different, I would say, knowledge from the product managers who are driving it. But for now, we'll focus more on the AI-driven products versus the AI products, because I believe will be much more relevant to folks here. So if you look at the AI stack, and I wanted to highlight some of this stack here as well, is to help people understand how the industry is evolving. So we have the infrastructure layer. These are the cloud providers or the compute hardware for cloud providers being the likes of Google or AWS or Microsoft, Azure, who typically will provide the resources to actually run your models. On top of it are foundation models. Again, typically all of these cloud providers also have their own foundation models that they have trained on a huge amount of data. Some of these can also be fairly specialized too. So, and each of these models, could be catering to one or more of output types. But if you look at where the industry is going, more and more we are seeing the trend of multimodal models, which is a model can handle different kinds of inputs and different kinds of outputs, just from a content perspective. Typically, a cloud provider will provide both the infrastructure and the foundation models. There are other companies like Claude who also provide foundation models. There are also open source models like Llama and a few others who have open source their GenAI models, which can then be used in some of these infrastructure providers, and the model can be more trained or fine-tuned there. So next is the domain-specific models, and this is where it becomes interesting, and this is where I believe most of the opportunity is because when I looked at most of these models, they're trained on generic data sets. So if they have to provide a highly accurate result, which is specific to a use case, typically they don't perform that well. And this is where having a more domain-specific models helps. There is a bit of specialization that's happening over here too. So for example, Google also has launched their healthcare models. And I expect more and more of specialization to come in this space, both by the hyperscalers, the cloud providers, plus also industry as such. Then comes the enablers, which are the picks and shovels. These are the likes of folks who are enabling the entire MLOps life cycle. These are low code, no code platforms. It could be compliance tools, so on and so forth. And then on the top sits the application layer, where these AI models are being used to deliver a specific use case. And they are, many examples of these application AI-driven applications in the market. So Gen AI lifecycle, if you look at it, let me see, let me minimize it. So look at a Gen AI lifecycle, Gen AI product lifecycle. It always starts with identifying the use cases. That is extremely important for any product. Of course, we go through the build phase, launch phase, but a very important phase for AI products is the improve, because AI products need to be tuned once they have been launched. Again, taking into consideration if the data, conditions, assumptions that were made while building the model are really true in production. And many a times have seen that there is a fair amount of variation, there's fair amount of difference in how users use. There are fair amounts of acceptance criteria by the end users. So it's extremely important to have that improve, just the model improvement step in the AI product lifecycle. So identifying use cases, as with all products, it all begins with business goals and customer pain points. And this is a good time, I believe, for evaluating pretty much every industry and every product that we have in the market to understand what are the customer pain points there. It could be simple automation tools, it could be content generation tools, it could be marketing, sales tools, it could be customer operations tools, whatever it is. It's a very good time to evaluate if the overall ease of use of the product or the effort score for the user can be decreased by using Gen AI. So we spoke about some of these examples, and these are just a very small subset. So there is a significant cost reduction that can be done by automation, and a lot of this automation can be driven by Gen AI. We can deliver personalized experiences. Of course, some of these are more discriminative AI use cases, but the way the industry is evolving is that what was traditionally discriminative AI use cases can now also be supported by Gen AI, and typically there will be a combination of models that will be used to deliver a specific use case. So better decisioning, prediction of demand, price optimization, fraud detection, and so on and so forth. So at a high level, the AI capabilities can be thought of as classifying. Classifying is, putting things in different buckets. And they need not be only two, it can be a number of buckets. The second one, as we spoke about, was predicting. Predicting is around being able to predict the probability of something happening, or being able to predict the output or the outcome. The third one is check verify, is being able to compare two things and be that verification layer, translate from one language to another. And this is is very good Gen AI capability that has really improved the translation quality than what was there before. Because earlier it was more of a word-to-word translation, but now it has become much more natural language-like. And we did speak about generate capabilities, and then of course our summarize capability. Summarize is you take huge amounts of data, and AI, especially generative AI, can summarize the key points from it. So again, I'm just trying to give a directional view of what kind of use cases will require a discriminative AI versus a generative AI model. And there are trade-offs, because discriminative AI models tend to be much more accurate than generative AI. They don't have the problem of hallucinations. And overall, they work very well if the data variety is small. Whereas generative AI has got their own sweet spot of being able to generate content, create new content which didn't exist before. So going to use cases, there are many, but I wanted to highlight a few ways in which generative AI is being used. A good example is code generation. For example, the GitHub Copilot, I think, is very, very popular and famous. There are others, for example, being able to generate insights from Tableau using a prompt. And this is actually a code generation capability that is being used, is because from the prompt, the system is able to discern intent. From intent, it's able to discern a SQL code, which is fetching the data from the backend, and then it's displaying it in the UI. So this is actually a code generation. It's not an image generation capability. It's actually a code generation capability that is being leveraged for, let's say, visualization in Tableau. So text generation, Grammarly is a great example. I don't want to go too much in depth. There's also a company called Jasper. This was one of the darlings of the new Gen AI startups, and where the entire marketing content was generated using Gen AI. And this was on brand and using the brand tone of voice. Then the typical chatbots that we see are also actually text generation, because they are trained on the information, the knowledge base, and then they're expected to generate answers to the prompts based on that. So even this is a text generation capability that is being leveraged. So image generation, Midjourney, again, a very, very popular and well-known app for image generation. But these image generation capabilities are being included in Adobe Firefly, the historical suite, like Figma as well, to generate designs and generate images. So text to audio, there's something called Murph AI, a very interesting one, which creates lifelike audio from text for voiceovers, which, while there was a capability, but it was not as smooth as it is using Gen AI. And then Otter.ai is also something that I personally use too, which does automatic translations as people speak. This you can also see in Google Meet, where you can turn on the captions, and as we speak, the captions are generated irrespective of the language. So this is another interesting use case of classification using Gen AI. Classification is typically considered a discriminative AI, but the volume of data that and the rapid changes which are required for fraud detection make it a classic um, use case to use Gen AI. And the same thing with healthcare, because in healthcare, you're looking at images, you're trying, and there's the quantum of data, the quantum of unstructured data that needs to be analyzed is very, very huge. And this is where Gen AI can also make a difference, even for use cases like classification use cases. So we'll take maybe a 10-minute break. I think you're doing great on time. So we'll take a 10-minute break. I shouldn't say break, but what I would encourage people is to think through some of the use cases where they can apply any of these techniques, either within their own companies or the problem statements that they're encountering. And maybe we can just have that discussion or here as well. So meanwhile, I can just take a couple of questions from the audience. So the first one is from uh, Ravi. We'll talk about data security a bit later. And from Vikas, it is, does a Gen AI model needs to be a discriminative model to be built? No, not really. And we just spoke about how Gen AI is not Gen AI. Gen AI model is a completely different category of model altogether. Gen AI model is also, I would say, a machine learned model. So that is the overarching umbrella for discriminative and Gen AI model. But Gen AI models do not need discriminative AI model to be built. It's a different model altogether. There's a concern on the amount of energy resources being spent for training Gen AI models. Yes. So there is quite a bit of concern. And if you look at Elon Musk's latest statement, he's saying that by 2025, there will not be enough energy to train all the Gen AI models that all of the enterprise companies are building. And that might be a bit of exaggeration, but yeah, there is concern. There is concern for energy. There's also concern for cost. However, the right way to go, and we'll again discuss this in build versus buy discussion that we'll have, is that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. The wheel already has been invented. Now we have to figure out how do we optimize the wheel for the use cases that we have. And this is where fine-tuning is a much better approach than trying to completely train a Gen AI model. So if yeah, I mean, that's the beauty about Gen AI is if you look at NVIDIA CEO, it is true that right now the ability to apply technology has become extremely intuitive. So you can definitely learn Gen AI about Gen AI and also how to use Gen AI through some of the no-code, low-code platforms. EMO is a new model that was built by Alibaba Group, which emotes along with the voice variation. It's a very interesting capability that they have built. Yeah. So for larger training data sets, using synthetic data to increase outcome efficiency, will the results be reliable? See, it's in some industries, we actually don't have the volume of data to really train our models. This is especially true for enterprise products. So in that case, typically what is done is that you use synthetic data creation from a small subset. A larger subset with the same variation is created and used for training. However, once we train and launch the model, and this is again goes to the life cycle of AI products, we have to improve. And when the rubber meets the road is where a lot of the validations, data variations will come into play, and we have to invest that additional time to improve the model. shed some light on how cost effective. I didn't get that question, Ashwin. Maybe you could rephrase that for me, please. Okay, so Harish, your available models are built on generic data, and again, I will discuss some techniques for building GenAI products where the output, where we can use, I would say, product thinking techniques to improve the overall output. I would suggest it's worthwhile of an investment. Definitely, Vaibhav, invest time in learning, and most importantly, invest time in trying to play around and build with some of the tools that are available. So Gen AI, Bharat, yes, they can contribute to advancements in healthcare and medicine. We already see some good initiatives coming from private and public companies to use Gen AI to improve some of the outcomes in healthcare. Can Gen AI be used for recommendation systems? So I'll give you a good example, and this is also maybe a point to note, is that traditionally recommendation systems were purely discriminative in the sense that they had a set of data. On the data, there was some kind of labeling or human annotation that was done. The model learned from it, and then of course the model was used in the production to recommend a product based on the existing products that are available. Now, a company like Netflix, right? What they have done is that they have actually broken it out, where the data context generation has now become generative in the sense that to understand what a movie is about, what a show is about, they use the generative techniques. And then using that output is you are able to train a more discriminative model, such as a recommendation system to recommend the products or the recommend the content. But I'm sure, as the evolution goes further, there will be a point of time where everything might just be driven off generative AI models itself with the right kind of guardrails. Yeah, so I'm not very familiar with AWS QuickSight, but what my intention from the Tableau example was that sometimes it is not very obvious what capabilities are being used to produce that output. And I just wanted to show, like, a lot of these workflow automations that are coming up are also based on code generation, because typically based on the prompt, they're able to break down the problem into multiple parts and generate code for each of those and then chain them together to produce that output. So there's a lot of intent inference that is done, and then there will be a code generation for the actual workflow building that is done. So again, the goal was to help folks understand how to solve a problem that you have in mind using generative AI models that are available. Accuracy, we'll come to that. Too much data, goal is please use what's out there and optimize it or fine tune the models. That's a much better approach than trying to train an entire Gen AI model from scratch. Okay. We'll take a couple of more questions and then we can go back to the product building. Yeah. Yeah, Ashwin, you'll be very happy to know that GenAI or building a GenAI product is not a huge investment, and we'll see why. Because most of the times to do a POC, you already have the different pieces available. So with a small amount of investment to buy subscription of these products, and then of course investing for the user interface, you can actually get a POC out to validate your idea fast. Yeah. So whether a solution has to be built with Gen AI or not is a very good question, and that will depend on the use case by use case. Like, is there a sufficient customer pain? Is there the frequency of pain is high? So we need to take into all of these considerations to really apply Gen AI to it, use case to it. Yeah, I can also share. I have some data here, Akhila, to share where the likes of McKinsey are expecting to see a lot of adoption and impact for Gen AI. So just okay. Did anyone come up with any bright idea that they would like to share with the larger audience here? Okay. So it is equally important to determine the KPI and success criteria right up front. And this goes back to identifying the use case. AI cannot be a solution looking for a problem, but you have to define the business goals and the success criteria up front to see if you're making any meaningful impact with it. So I would break it down into two. I would say kinds of KPIs. One is the model KPIs itself. These are things like response rate, accuracy, precision, recall, error rates, so on and so forth. And these need to be measured independently and as a part of the model building. And then, of course, our business KPIs. So, for example, being able to understand what has been the impact on user effort, like what is the reduction in time to build, what is the reduction in personnel needed, what is the self-serve improvement rate, what has been the click-through rate or conversion rate, what has been the revenue uplift. So these are the business metrics. So both of these metrics need to be used together. Some Gen AI models may need a higher model accuracy itself. So for example, we use Gen AI for inferring intent in ad tech. Their model accuracy of 85% is excellent. And you don't need more accurate than that to put a model into production. Then we also use Gen AI for creating a customer segment using a user prompt. There, a very high degree of accuracy was expected. So the expectation was that the actual output of the Gen AI assistant should be at least 95 to 98% for a user to be able to confidently use that consistently to do their segmentation. So accuracy is highly dependent on the use case. There is no one size fits all. Same thing with recommendations. Sure, I mean, the recommendations are incorrect. It's not going to harm anyone, right? But if the actual classification is wrong or not brand appropriate for let's say content generation, then that might be a concern. Okay, so when you look at build a model, I've simplified this tremendously. I just wanted to show two things. The first and foremost is that everything starts with the user interface. So whatever you guys as PMs we have learned, user experience, that's still extremely valid. Then you typically would have an application layer, which will be working with a ML layer. And of course, you have the data layer as a foundation for any of your ML models to be built. The current trend is that there's a mixture of experts. A mixture of experts is typically an ensemble of models, which will break down the task into smaller subtasks, and it will use a variety of models to achieve each of these tasks. In some cases, you can use an out-of-the-box model. In some cases, you want to use a self-hosted model. And in addition to that, you would want to use something called RAG, which is essentially enables the model to take into consideration external sources of data while creating a output. Because traditionally, the models provide an output based on what they have already been trained. But if they have not seen that piece of information before, they can still include that by using a technique called RAG. Once the output is given and to the user, the next part is, of course, the user feedback itself, which is extremely important to capture to ensure to get an understanding of whether the output was correct or not from the perspective of the user. Of course, the model accuracy also will be measured, but also the user experience and user satisfaction is also something which needs to be measured closely. So if you look at it, data is a big part. Data is a big part, and the data standardization, data quality is extremely, extremely important for AI applications. So how do we improve AI quality? I think we saw a couple of questions. People had concerns about the quality of AI output. First and foremost is invest in robust data collection. Invest in clean data collection. Robust data essentially is you would need to collect as much data as possible which is related to the use case. So, and then it can be augmented with either synthetic data or data derived from the base data. This is still a very under-invested area for an organization. A lot of times people don't even sorry about that. So this is a fairly underinvested area in many companies, being collecting, even things like user interactions within the product. All of those are not the top priority many times, but that for AI products, it's extremely important. It's also important, of course, there are some other techniques around recency of data, how much data to store, how much data to use, and all of that can be taken into consideration based on the velocity, variety of data. For example, if it's an e-commerce data, having the 13 or 14 months of data to account for seasonality maybe would be enough. For financial services, maybe you need much longer, so on and so forth. But a good example is when we were building a GenAI application, what we found was that we were not collecting a very specific piece of data which was required for optimization. And then we had to go back and capturing and making it available to the ML system. That itself took a good quarter of effort. And that is when we could really start in first the model building part, and then, of course, the ML engineering part of bringing the modeling to the product. So always, as PMs, please get intimate with the data, understand the context of data in as much detail as possible. And this is a very, very important skill for AI product managers. So build versus buy. This is again a bit of a hot topic. If you look at the GenAI model landscape already out there, they are actually fairly specialized models. If you go to huggingface.org, you will see they are, I want to say, tens of thousands of specialized models, open source models that are already available. The likes of Google or Azure, Microsoft, they all have very specialized GenAI models that are already available. So when you are starting out, and you want to, at least according to me, when you want to build something quick to validate whether there is any value in it, it may make sense to just take a model off the shelf and then build your application, build your POC, and see what is the user experience and business value that is being delivered. And these are also cheaper because these are typically what you're only paying for are the API costs. Like any API cost at the max will cost you maybe $1 or so from these to produce one output. But even that is at a much higher level. Most of the times I've seen it as low as 2 cents, 10 cents per API call. So if you want to build something fast and if you want to validate something fast, you can leverage already existing models that are already there in the market. buy. We just spoke about the buy options, the build. So where build becomes important is when you are fine-tuning the accuracy of your model. What we find that a lot of these out-of-the-box models are you can't you can't train them with your specific data set. And that is because a lot of times when someone was asking, do they take our data to train their models? Actually, no. They don't do that. They don't, or they profess they don't use the input data to train their underlying models. And so typically, if you're using an out-of-the-box model, to fine-tune it to your use case is a bit of a task, because you have to break it down into multiple steps and then the output into multiple steps, and then there's some amount of fine-tuning that can be done. So if there are specific use cases, specific data sets, which typically are not available in open web, all of these models are typically trained on open web data, then building your own model might be a better option. Of course, there are privacy and data leak concerns. A lot of large companies are heavily regulated, like banking or telecom, and they may not be able to use out of the box, or rather the hyperscaler or the cloud provider models at all. And if they're already large in-house teams who are fairly advanced in, let's say, their AI journey and maturity, then building a model may not be that hard for the team. So even when I talk about build, I'm talking about, let's say, taking an out-of-the-box model and then fine-tuning further with the specific data, or controlling the outputs of that model with the specific data related to the use case. So this is again an excellent example. I had taken the same prompt and I have run this on two different models. One is Stable Diffusion, which is an image model, and there's another newer model called Absolute Reality. And you can see fundamentally the quality of output is so much more better in the second one because it is highly fine-tuned. So even for each of the use cases, there are many fine-tuned models beyond, like, say, ChatGPT or Gemini models out there. And you can use these specific models based on your use cases. The other one is prompt engineering. So one on the left is using a basic prompt, and the one on the right is using enhanced prompt. And prompt engineering is, I would say, the most widely used method to produce a higher quality output from the, let's say, commercial models or hyperscaler cloud provider models that are out there. So how does prompt engineering work? There are actually courses out there, and there are specific jobs out there which call for prompt engineering. So this is an area that is worth investing. So typically this requires the AI to give it a persona so that it can get into that mindset. So for example, typically you would want to tell them, oh, you're a marketer, or you are an engineer, or you are a risk analyst, or you're a blog writer, or whatever it is. When you give that persona, it takes into consideration if there are any guardrails related to that persona. The second is giving detailed instructions as much as possible. And these detailed instructions, order matters, and context also matters. A good example is, in this case, I just had talked about a humanoid and with apocalypse background. But here I talked about resolution, talked about the real life features, high contrast, and when you also look at the image sizes and so on and so forth. So it is worthwhile to understand what each of the model has as parameters to ensure that you're giving the right kind of input to it to optimize it to your output. And this is what I'd seen also at Tiny Albert when we were building this email marketing automation tool or GenAI assistant, where the first few times where we just gave them prompts, we were not getting the right output. And then we gave them a lot of context about the brand, about the products. We gave them reference website URLs. And then we saw the output being much, much better than what it was before. And to a point, we could take it to market commercially. So in the input, you typically, and even yeah, and even like for example, when you're asking for that output in that prompt itself, typically you would just see someone writing a one-liner. But this is where the product thinking again comes, is where you take that prompt, you add additional content from other sources to it, and you would add specific instructions around what is acceptable, not acceptable. And all of that will actually be sent to the, what I would say, these, let's say, OpenAI API model to produce an output. So typically, it's not only what the user has entered, but a lot more context is added as a part of the prompt engineering layer itself. You can also include examples in it. So for example, one thing that we do at Zeotab is we give examples of, we actually share what are all the different attributes that are there, so that when the SQL code comes back, it only includes the attributes that are already there in the database. Otherwise, GenAI can produce any kind of attributes. If they're not there, then that SQL query will actually break. So there is a lot of prompt engineering that can be done to improve the overall quality. And this has been one area where I've seen a lot of our outcomes by making investments into it. So we talked about the RAG. So this is called augmenting, let's say, the base model with data from outside. This is one way of preventing hallucination. This is also another way of ensuring that richer output is provided if the base model didn't have that data. So this RAG method is used, let's say, someone, if you may ask ChatGPT or any of one of these other platforms, you may ask, okay, who is the Prime Minister of Pakistan? It may or may not have the data because they just had their elections, right? So then, or it may give you an output which may not be true. Then you can use a query to open web to validate if the output that is provided is actually correct or not. So this again is to prevent hallucinations, to improve the overall accuracy of GenAI models itself, GenAI experience itself. So lastly, this is again a product, I would say hack or a product layer to it, is that you put human in the loop. At least at this point of time, for enterprise clients which require a great deal of accuracy, 100% automation using GenAI is not something that I would recommend. What I would instead recommend is that the output be provided to the end user. Let the end user validate it. And this can be someone you auto-create a workflow, but you don't enable that workflow. You auto-create a segment, but you don't automatically save it. You give the user the ability to edit and make changes to the output before it gets used. Again, a very similar example that we did in the email marketing is that we would create the entire email content. We would create the subject lines, everything, but it will not be automatically scheduled. The user can still see, verify, edit it if they don't like something, and then schedule it. So that is the approach that we used for ensuring that the user still felt that they were in control of the outcome. And it would also enable us to not be liable for, let's say, wrong output from the GenAI models. So similarly, other ways is getting a thumbs up, thumbs down sign to collect feedback about the model output. And then, of course, specifically asking what parts or the reasons why they thought that the output didn't quite match their expectations. So privacy and compliance. Uh, Before I think I go here, let me check if there are any specific questions. Yeah, actually there are some companies are working on creating stock trends for fund management. So there is a Gen AI fund, Gen AI index fund also already in the market. AR, VR, not quite, Lekha, but of course we can see if you have any specific questions at the end of the session. So privacy and compliance, there are more and more regulations that are coming up across the world for regulating Gen AI. EU is one of the first companies to have done so, to put forward a AI Regulation Act, and it has already been ratified. So this gives a good framework, and I think it's a very good framework to understand or to give some guidelines around where and when the AI can be used and what kind of compliance requirements can be around it. So for example, if it's something which is a very minimal risk, go for it. But if it is required, uh, if it has got limited risk, so for example, if there's a chatbot, there's an emotion recognition, if it's a biometric, then it is limited risk, and you have to declare upfront that this is being driven by AI. Then you have high risk, and then of course unacceptable. These are unacceptable risks, essentially means that they should not be using AI for these use cases at all. And for high risk, there is the company needs to share the on an ongoing basis certain details about how they are using AI within the applications and what kind of considerations that has been taken. So this is an important one for even collecting the data for model optimization, which includes even optimizing the experience, whether or not an output was meeting their expectations. It has to be included in disclosures and in the master service agreements, whether your terms and conditions, it could be a simple terms and conditions where someone accepts while for the first time when they're using the product or logging into the product, so on and so forth, and also provide opt-outs. So for example, if a user is opting out, then their data should not be used or stored for training the model. There is a need for anonymization, and this is where the biggest concern is, that you need to ensure that no PII information, that is your first name, last name, emails, phone numbers, usernames, or any other kind of CRM identifiers, so on and so forth, is captured and used for model building. Typically, what they do is they do a random assignment of that record, a user record, without any PII data to ensure that it cannot be traced back to a specific individual using any other data sources. Then, of course, there's a bit of differential privacy. These is primarily used by large platforms who have enormous amount of data, where they inject a bit of noise into their models to ensure that it is not heavily dependent on some specific data set. So all of this means what? It means that your legal team is your new best friend, and you have to work with your legal teams to ensure that whatever you are building is compliant with the law of the land. If you're building something on your own, definitely make sure that you have the right disclosures and opt-outs available in the product for to ensure that the ample amount of options are provided to the user, and they don't, and you have some legal basis in case of any disputes. The other one that we spoke about was generate, as we spoke in the last slide, is that whenever there's a limited risk, it has to be explicitly highlighted that it is built with AI. So having the right kind of signage or indicators in the product is also important. The next one is declaration. This is important because GenAI does not provide, or its accuracy is not that high. So, or accuracy cannot be guaranteed. So in this case, having the right kind of declarations for any errors will help save the company from future lawsuits. So this is an interesting one where I think there was one post where the Canadian Airlines chatbot gave some incorrect information, and the passenger then sued Canadian Airlines, and it was upheld in court that Canadian Airlines was liable for the wrong answer that was given by the chatbot. But if you do have the declaration, again, you'll have some kind of legal basis to say that, hey, we shared this upfront, that the answer could be wrong. So I can pause here and maybe take a couple of questions for these sessions. Yeah, it's huggingface.org. So examples of hallucinations in commercially implemented GenAI models. Yeah, I mean, a good example is what I can just share from my experience is that let's say you're creating a summary out of text, and you want the model to give you key insights. Then there can be some specious arguments that the model can come up with based on, let's say, any kind of historical data it has seen, or rather based on the training data it has seen. So that is one. The other one was, for example, content some created using GenAI. Again, may not the chatbot example, right? You can take the chatbot example where an answer was given which was not correct, and that will, yeah, and probably there was not there in any of the knowledge base, but GenAI gave that answer because of hallucinations. Gemini AI, I know it's a very sensitive topic, bias in AI. It goes both ways. Bias is introduced because the data set itself can be extremely skewed and biased. And this is what I was speaking, to a couple of my fellow volunteers in NASCOM, is that many a times when these models are created, they are heavily indexed on, I want to say, information from the West. So sometimes the models may be more biased towards the patterns which are seen in a certain geography or a section of society. So how do we remove that bias? I think Google had good intentions, but unfortunately they brute forced it, which meant that they introduced rules which injected bias correction in every scenario, which need not be, right? Especially if you have some of these outputs have these prompts have specific outputs. Like, for example, create a picture of Elon Musk. There's no, it cannot be another person. It has to be Elon Musk. So there was a very specific output, and in such scenarios too, the bias algorithm or the bias correcting algorithm probably kicked in. So not a very well thought through way of addressing bias. AI product manufacturing scenarios. I think it's a very interesting topic. There is a significant opportunity in manufacturing, especially with IoT data, which is not being used. And when you look at things like operations, there is such a huge opportunity for monitoring, let's say, operations in a factory, looking at IoT data to look at device performance, even in case of maintenance. So I spoke to a gentleman who was in the oil and gas industry, and he was saying is that they are using Gen AI and they are using IoT together to understand what could be potential maintenance scenarios that could come up. So, and of course, being able to visualize things like, you know, any kind of like automotive product that is hugely beneficial. It's hugging face, but okay, I can definitely type it out. Yeah. The traditional automation required us to come up with those automation rules out of the box. That is, let's say that if someone wanted to automate a workflow, then that workflow would have to be preconceived and then be automated. The beauty about Gen AI is that someone can think of a workflow automation, and that can happen by looking at the intent, breaking down the intent, breaking down and mapping that into different parts of the task, and then mixing and matching the tasks based on what is required. So that is the reason why Gen AI automation is a much more broader way than the traditional automation, where literally someone had to think through, and you had a very limited set of automations that were available. That's right. So I think that's where the opportunity of Gen AI is to automate a lot of the mundane work, which required human intervention. Yes, it's havingface.co. Yeah, so that's another big topic about deepfakes. We don't have an answer to that yet. A lot of people are trying to work on that. There are some solutions in the market that are being proposed. One is the digital watermarking of any Gen AI created content. But typically what happens is these malicious um, actors use a multiple or multitudes of models together. So sometimes that is it becomes a bit obscured. It is also challenging because there's no standard for AI regulation. So for example, EU, India, and West puts in regulation, but China doesn't. Then you can still build models out of a region and proliferate throughout the world. So yes, that's definitely a very big problem in the market. Okay. So launching, what I would as as any AI product, I would suggest that we always launch in an A/B test mode so that you can truly see if using AI has made a fundamental difference to the outcome, to the business outcomes. And typically it involves being able to expose the model or the model results only to a certain part of the population, while the rest of it continue to experience what has been the base standard experience. For enterprise products, beta launches and early adopter programs are very, very important. And I would suggest this to be the way to go. And sometimes you don't even get clients, because if you're an enterprise client, you may have maybe 10,000 clients. And if you're thinking it's sensitive to launch it to the larger audience, launch it to maybe 1 or 2 friendlies. And this is what we did at Zeotap, is that before we even launched it to clients, we asked our business users to first and foremost go and test it internally. And that was a great way, because we learned a lot just by having our internal non-technical users who are not close to the product, but who had enough context about it to go use the product. And some of the insights we used in our positioning, we used to optimize the product before and optimize some best practices, create additional help content. So use any and every safe source that you have to test out the product before it is exposed to public. See, another trend that I see is that a lot of these AI products are paid or premium products, which really hamper their adoption. And AI products require as much usage as possible, as wide usage as possible to really improve. Because what is trained typically, again, when building the model, usually is not comprehensive. So don't think about monetization on day one. It's a very important decision, but think of adoption and or can always put some guardrails like the first 3 months are free or the first 6 months are free. But focus on adoption, focus on people getting to use the product as much as possible. Even if you're building a completely separate product from scratch, on day one, I suggest don't think of monetization. Think of first and foremost adoption and seeing if it's delivering any value or not. So second one is proactively collect user feedback. Product analytics, I cannot stress this enough. It is always an afterthought. Once the product is launched, when we want to look at the data, sometimes it realizes that, oh, we never collected data for that particular module. We didn't collect data for that scenario, or we didn't collect data, we didn't collect the input prompts. So learn from, I would say, some of the scenarios I've seen in the past. So always have your product analytics in place before you launch it. In addition to that, do collect via in-app forms. If you have a chatbot, collect feedback using in-app chats. A lot of these can be configured in a way to trigger chats at a specific point of usage for that customer. And lastly, definitely do user interviews. Even if you are doing B2C, you can always try to find users who are willing to share their feedback for, let's say, a thank you gift. If you're working for an enterprise, anyways, you'll have to handhold the first launch with the beta clients. So go back and define, get feedback. After you get feedback, implement feedback to demonstrate that you're taking what they are saying seriously. And then, of course, go back to see if that has improved their experience. So let me quickly check if there are any other questions. So I'm not really, so let me do this. Improve. So once your launch is over, yes, of course, we need to celebrate, but the work is not done yet. And this is an important factor because a lot of times when we discuss these initiatives internally, we need to set some kind of timelines on when people can roll off the project, especially with AI projects, AI products, AI initiatives. You would need to have extended support, not as much maybe as you're building it, but definitely have extended support from engineering, from data science allocated to the project to ensure that there is sizable utility that is being derived. This also requires, so typically, let's say that AI initiative took a quarter to build and launch in beta. It will take another 1 quarter or 2 quarters to go from beta to general availability. And then again, another 1 to 2 quarters of optimization to see if there are any quick improvements that need to make. And quick improvements are important because if those are not made, and if we are not meeting the business or the user quality targets, people will get disillusioned with it and will not come back. Or you'll have to put enormous amount of effort to bring the people back into the product to use it. So once you launch it, just make sure that you still have your foot on the pedal to continuously improve the product until it is at an acceptable level. And have a fallback. Let's say things are not going great. Of course, you have done A/B testing, but let's say for whatever reason the model is not performing, then heuristic rules, that is simple rule setting, that still works. You would be surprised to know how often it is used in even some of the largest B2C products. That yes, they will have the recommendation engines, but they will also have let's say, first page, first time user experience, where either you don't have the data or the probability is low, then they will fall back to a rule that they have set for that use case. For, let's say, products which are being used one-on-one by an end consumer, so you do give them the option to bypass the AI layer and not, force the user constantly to continue to use it, even if the performance is not great. And the third one is that models change, models quality change, because sometimes the underlying data on which it was built change. So good example is when we were building this credit scoring model, and we deployed it, and it was working great for about 6 months. And then we started to note that the model was deteriorating. And then I had to go back and ask the client, I wanted to understand, like, what has changed? And he mentioned that they opened up their product, their credit product, not just to working professionals, but also students. Now, that is a fundamentally different customer segment who exhibits a very different customer behavior. And because of that, the assumptions, the relationships between the different data points no longer held true. So again, we had to go back and fine tune and rebuild the model with this new customer segment that was using this model. So it happens quite a bit. If you look at geographic expansion, geographies are not all the same. Sometimes there's a lot of seasonality, which may not have been considered. So ongoing performance monitoring is extremely important. So I'll stop here, and the last 15 minutes or so, we can talk about some of the skills that are required for AI product management. Yeah, at some point we do expect to have artificial general intelligence, and that will probably happen within the next 5 years or so. I'm not as optimistic as Elon Musk, who believes it's going to happen much faster. But sure, definitely within the next 5 years, we'll have the artificial general intelligence, and then artificial super intelligence. Sure, it can happen, but it also depends upon if there's regulation around it to prevent it. A good example is human cloning. Human cloning is feasible, but it is not allowed due to a regulation that many countries together put and agree to adhere to. So a lot of things, sure, feasibility is there. Will we actually do it? It depends upon a lot of other factors. Yeah, self-training, and they are unsupervised models, which essentially learn without needing any kind of human intervention. Yes, so those are called unsupervised models, where just based on the data, the model infers certain rules. Okay, so we'll come to the skills a bit later. But any other questions on product building so far for AI products? Sorry, these are the questions. Okay. Um, yeah, we can then maybe we move on to the skills needed. So if you look at traditional product management, typically it is an amalgamation of having a lot of business context, having systems thinking to bring that business outcome and codify that, or rather build a tech product around it, and of course focus on user experience. What would be a good user experience, intuitive experience for the end user? So these are the 3 core skills. The AI product manager requires Actually, all of this, which is the core product management skill, as well as having an understanding of the AI capabilities and limitations. And I say capabilities because we spoke AI can do 5 or 6 really interesting, tasks, core tasks, which of course morph themselves into different use cases. Having an understanding of what is the underlying capability and how to show that into or translate those into use cases is something that is an understanding that's required. And it is also requires AI product lifecycle knowledge. So typically, what is the kind of resources are required? What are the considerations, legal considerations, which are required? How much, how to optimize this further? When can you really, focus less on it? How to use provide the right kind of monitoring tooling to ensure that you are always ensuring that the model is performing well. So all of these are the AI product lifecycle skills which are required as well for an AI product manager. So some understanding of the different AI capabilities will definitely be very, very helpful. People don't have to code, but knowing, okay, using a Gen AI model, I can create a video, I can create a text, but hey, the text may always not produce the right outcome. So how do I put enough of guardrails? Why product experience there is something that the AI product managers will need to be aware of. So I'll pause here if there are any questions. Harleen, you can also take questions, let's say from LinkedIn as well, and I'm happy to answer them here. Yeah. Somehow, you can use the if you have the data readily available, then definitely you can use it to but I don't really understand the use case. But if you're interested in understanding um, how to detect fraud, sure, you can definitely use the historical data. Gen AI is also exceptionally good at tracking trends to flag fraud as well. And this fraud can happen in a number of ways. It can happen for trading, it can happen for purchase, it can happen for financial transactions, credit card transactions, you name it. So it can the fraud framework can be applied for a number of use cases. Neither, no, that's not correct. If you can become an AI product manager by two things. The first and foremost is gaining some understanding about the AI capabilities and AI models. But I think, see, for me, the differentiating factor for an AI product manager is the data fluency. Well, that is a fundamental skill, I believe, an AI product manager will need is to understand the context of data, being able to dig deeper into data to understand things like anomalies, spurious behavior, so on and so forth. So if someone is not very comfortable with uh, data, becoming an AI product manager will require some effort. But again, as we see, there are enough of tools in place which might address, some of these gaps. And the AI stack is going to become more and more robust. to make it more low code and no code. Yeah, sort of for me, the PM skill is primarily being able to understand a business or a business opportunity or a customer pain point. And that skill will still be extremely relevant. Of course, you may have additional awareness around AI models and AI capabilities, which is required. But ultimately, it all goes back to what is the customer problem? Do we want to even solve this problem? Because does it make sense for us as a business to solve this problem? What is the business impact that we're going to make? What is the user impact that will be, or user value that will be created? Those fundamental questions or the fundamental critical thinking there is not going to change. Yeah. So, Neera, I don't believe PM roles will be at a risk. What PMs or the smarter PMs will do is to leverage the AI tools to make the job much more easier. So, for example, typically, if there is a very detailed PRD that needs to be written and that takes a sizable amount of time, to some extent, that process can be simplified by using AI. However, the critical thinking part of it is what is the business problem? Why is this a problem? And what would be an elegant solution for this problem? Those critical thinking is still a product manager's job. So at least this will, I would say, help us rather than harm, because then we can focus on the better part of our work, which is trying to understand why. Harleen, we have a few more minutes. I'm happy to take some questions from other channels as well.
Okay, great. I can read out some questions that we've received on LinkedIn. One of them is, what type of LLMs are better to use? We see raising concerns about data privacy and the risk of the model learning and propagating bias.
Yeah. So I'll take the first one. So they are, LLMs which are specialized for different use cases. There is a website, Hugging Face, face.co, where you can find the list of models which have been fine-tuned already for the different use cases, and you're welcome to leverage any of them based on the use case that you have. A lot of the hyperscaler, or rather the cloud providers, also have their out-of-the-box models, which are available just via an API to be used within your product. Some of it will be trial and error. I cannot say which model will be better for the use case or not, but you can see, and you'll have to use an ensemble of models. You'll have to ensure the way you're building your product is that any of these models can be just a plug and play for you rather than being heavily integrated, so that if something better comes along, you can just swap it out. The second one is a harder one, where there are data privacy concerns and data leakage concerns. These are very valid concerns. A lot of the cloud providers as well as other model providers will claim that your data will not be used for training the model. And that is probably true. But when using these models, it's extremely important to scrub out any sensitive data. So for example, to use these models, maybe any of the PII data should not be sent in any of the prompts. So that is where engineering, or rather prompt engineering, as well as this overall ML engineering comes into play, is that we don't just take whatever the user gives, but we break it up, we clean it up, we remove what needs to be removed, we add the additional context, and then that is actually sent to the model for producing an output. So data sanitization is an important part, especially if you're using an out-of-the-box model.
Okay, great. Um, we have another question from LinkedIn, but okay, it reads recent concern on Gemini where it gave outputs which were not correct. This means essentially AI output is still dependent on inputs from humans. And they've said sorry for asking a layman question.
No, actually, AI output depends greatly on the input data that was provided. What has really improved with these extremely large models is that they are able to assimilate data, such huge quantities of data, that there is some amount of generalization that can be done. Um, so AI is not there yet to not depend on human input. At the end of the day, it all models, generative AI or discriminative AI, are heavily dependent on the data it is being trained on. And that is why you do see biases in the output of these models, is because the input data that they were trained on was already biased. Gemini output is a bit unfortunate. Again, I think Google had good intent um, to maybe make their outputs not as biased, because initially when these models were released, there was a lot of conversation in the market about how it was trending more white, more male, or how some of the image generations were unnecessarily sexualized, so on and so forth. So I think they tried to put in some guardrails, but they probably didn't do enough testing, or they didn't do enough scenario analysis of where this bias correction should be added. And they just probably just added it very, very generically. So that for me was a bit immature for a company, from a company as big as Google. They should have, they could have done it better. Okay. So closing out, this is interesting, I would say, representation. Actual people talking about AI is probably everyone. My grandmother, or she knows AI. My mother-in-law, she knows AI. Everyone knows AI. My daughter knows AI, right? She's 7 years old, and everyone is talking about AI right now. We have seen a good use case adoption, but it's still, I would say, in the nascent phase. But people who are actually building with AI is still very, very low, considering how much adoption that can actually be. In future, I expect every product to be AI product. There will be some amount of artificial intelligence that will be leveraged within the product to make it more optimal, to make it more personalized, to reduce costs, so on and so forth. So we are still very few who are actually building AI products, but that can change. So I think someone asked me, where is the potential? If you look at it, a lot of the potential is on the marketing and sales side, because this is where traditional or discriminative AI was not as successful, because some of the content that has to be generated has to be very, very human-like. So that is across the board. And you see this, right? You see Salesforce Einstein, you see enough of marketing automation tools using AI to generate content in a predictive manner based on not just historical, not just, let's say, the general model, but also make it very, very personal to the account, the past interactions, so on and so forth. So there's a lot of opportunity there. There is also opportunity in software engineering. So basic applications, I think we've seen enough and more. Like, people can build websites with just a prompt right now. And that's an example of how easy it has become to build something in tech using generative AI. There is opportunity for customer operations, which includes everything around customer support. There's been a huge interest in chatbots. Chatbots have been around, but this makes it much more, this sounds much more human-like when generative AI applications or models are being used to drive that experience. So R&D is also in a very interesting area, especially if you look at all the buzz around gene engineering. Again, the reason why it is applicable is because the quantum of data was so huge to do any kind of gene mapping. If I recall, the first time it was done, it took more than 20 years to do all gene mapping. But imagine with these, LLMs and these large models, the capability to do analysis on large quantum of data and to recognize patterns without any human intervention is huge. So that is the reason why there is a lot of excitement about Gen AI in healthcare and especially in drug discovery space. So there's, of course, personalization, education. Now, the education is one of my, favorite areas because I was reading an article which said that they've tried different kind of interventions to improve overall education outcomes. Education outcomes are typically referenced as, students being able to answer certain questions in tests based on the concepts that were taught. And the only way they have seen an outcome improvement is by one-on-one tutoring. And one-on-one tutoring is not something which can be humanly possible. So the only option is if everybody could have their own personal tutor, which was powered by AI. And what I'm also told is that AI tutors are much more nicer and more patient than humans. And I agree with that, right? I mean, humans at some point, we all lose our patience. So there's a lot of opportunity there in education to use AI to provide personalized tutoring. And it is important for countries like us, where we have different languages, we have we have lack of resources and everybody has a phone. Imagine just if there could be a personal tutoring app which could be made available to everyone, what would that change, for our country, for a country like ours? There is a lot of scope of AI in manufacturing and supply chain too. Like IoT data tends to be traditionally very noisy. I worked on a battery optimization project for electrical vehicles, and the data was very sparse. So trying to get any kind of insights out of it was hard because we were dealing with very little and very distributed data. But Gen AI again has the capability of being able to do this pattern recognition in large and sparse amounts of data. And wherever there are gaps, it's also able to bridge those gaps. Because a lot of times, if the vehicle is out of network, then you will not even get data about the battery. Risk, legal, a lot of work is also being done in legal areas to do brief summary, brief insights. There's some really good companies being built there. Again, at least I believe is that there is opportunity in every industry. So what I would urge everyone to do is to go back and look at your product and think, hey, can I make this product faster, better, easier to use, automate, make it, automate. So these are like typical areas where a lot of impact of Gen AI can be seen. And there is an entire industry of no-code and low-code AI tools that is being built, which can be used to stack together to, again, build a quick application. Of course, for a really robust application, there is a requirement, there will be a requirement to bring in that engineering piece of it. But if you're just trying to test a product and market, there's no time better than now. And again, everyone can do a weekend project. We need more builders. I'm still very bullish on this. We need more builders to really unleash the value of AI. So I'm hoping, all you guys can go back and see how you can actually build an AI product. And it can be as simple as like a translation tool, right? It can be anything. So just go back and think about a pain point that you had, or you've seen in your community, in your customer base, in your company, and see how can you apply AI there. So, would like to give credit to some of my one of my friends, Vikas, who is running Gen AI class in Stanford. So he's been very instrumental initially when everything was coming out. And do form your AI clubs and discuss, because that's the only way to learn. There's so much happening across the world that if you connect with people and brainstorm together, I'm sure there will be a lot of learning as well as a lot of good ideas coming up. The other one is everythingai.club, another excellent site because it features all new AI products. And this is important because you can literally see how people have used AI in different use cases. And that itself might give you an inspiration to use it in yours. So I'll pause here. This is all I had. I'm hoping that everybody is going to be inspired enough to spend rest of the meeting building something, and hopefully we can come back and have another session where people can showcase what they have built.
Okay. Thank you so much, Malvika, for delivering a brilliant session. You provided some great and thought provoking insights. We've enjoyed having you with us here today. It has been a complete pleasure. Please accept this certificate of appreciation on behalf of the Institute. The QR code on the certificate will take you to a dedicated Hall of Fame page created for you with the recording of this session. This session will also be shared on our YouTube channel as well.
Thank you so much, Harleen. It was my pleasure, and I had a great time. And
I'm
thanks
so
everyone
glad to hear that. And as we can
for
see from the
joining
chat
us.
as well, too, everyone is thanking you for a great and informative session. So yeah.
Super. Thanks,
Okay.
everyone.
Thank you. Thank you to all our attendees for being here. We've got something cool that I'm sure you would all love. It's our newsletter, which is called the Product Pulse. It's a treasure trove of product management, strategy, and leadership tips and insights. You can subscribe to stay updated with the product community. You can find the link for the same in the chat window. We also host various knowledge sharing events. You can keep up to date with them with the link in the chat. To our attendees, a thanks again for joining in. If I'll wait here to let you all go ahead and scan the QR codes on the screen to maybe leave any reviews, feedback, or queries. I'll wait here for a few seconds to give you the time to scan the QR code. Okay, great. Thank you once again for giving us your valuable time. And I'm sure you've all had a fruitful time at this session. I look forward to hosting you in the future. On that note, we'll end today's session. Thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of the day.
Thank you.